Hack. I'm Spencer Thomason, and here at Startup Hack, we love training software developers and building custom software solutions. I do a lot of work as a fractional CTO. With over a decade of executive leadership and a solid 25 years in software development, I've mastered the art of transforming technology teams and products. All right, let's jump into today's topic. Open source is dead. Yep, I said it. The golden age of open source software seems to be over. Once hailed as the hero of software development, it's now facing a slow, painful death. So the question is, what killed it? What part of the issue is corporate interest that have crept into the open source world? What was once a community-driven effort has become commercialized, with companies prioritizing profits over collaboration. Let's dive into our topic today. All right, so let's dive into our topic. So open source was once the heralded community that was kumbaya, everybody join in, sing, work with open source, and that might be a little bit idealistic, right? I don't know that it ever was. In fact, I know projects like OpenWRT started because Linksys grabbed a kernel, built it, figured out they could get it to run on a router, the OpenWRT, or the WRT54G, which is where OpenWRT got its name. And then the open source community ended up suing them. They ended up releasing the source code, et cetera, et cetera. So this isn't a new argument. This isn't new, right? The corporate interest has been interfering with open source for a long time. But I think we're definitely seeing a huge decrease. And so all of the latest statistics show that open source is in a major decline. Now, one of the major examples of this shift is how large corporations use open source without contributing back. They take from the pool of freely available code, but don't give much in return. So think about it like a potluck where everybody brings food, except now most people are just showing up empty-handed. This creates an unstable model. Developers who pour their hearts into open source projects end up burned out, especially when they see corporations reaping the reward without compensation. I know I've done a lot of work with, I'm a big Canon fan for using, photography for DSLR photography, and I've used Magic Lantern for years. But I mean, and I'm probably guilty because I went and used it, and apparently bought a new camera, went to go flash Magic Lantern. I'm like, wait a minute, there's no Magic Lantern version for this. And sure enough, it's because the developer got burnt out, wasn't making any money from the project, had been working on it like nonstop for like 4 years and with no compensation. So to be fair, some companies do still support open source, but usually it's with some kind of alternative method or alternate motive, right? So it's not what it used to be. The heart of open source, community, collaboration, shared innovation, it's fading. Look at what's happened with licenses, like HashiCorp controversy. Companies are changing the rules to protect their own interests, making it harder for developers to freely use and share code. The open source dream is being twisted into something recognizable. Also, make sure that you go back and check out our previous code samples, because we love to train software developers here, so I turn out hundreds of free code samples. I'm not exaggerating when I say hundreds. There's over 500 free code samples out there and more coming down the pipe. Now, another nail in the coffin is the financial stability of open source and the financial sustainability of the open source projects. Developers need to eat, right? For years, people contribute to open source in their free time, like I talked about, driven by their passion, but passion doesn't pay the bills. And these days, many developers find themselves forced to take on corporate jobs or find another way to monetize their work. Open source has gone from being a labor of love to a side hustle, and when things start to break, and that's really where things start to break down. So we can't ignore the slow evaporation of the free open source or FOSS surplus. That surplus was a huge reason open source thrived. Developers had time, energy, and a shared belief that they were making something for the greater good. But with the tech world evolving so rapidly, developers are spread really thin. So instead of building a sustainable ecosystem, we're seeing fewer new contributions and more projects burn out. This decline in active participation is yet another reason open source is gasping for air. Now, some argue that open source may still be very much alive. And sure, it's not completely dead yet. I might be a little dramatic and a little bit YouTube-ish, right? But it's definitely on life support. Big companies like Microsoft, Google, Amazon say that they support open source, but if you look a lot deeper, much of their support is more about controlling key open source projects to serve their own needs and their own interests, right? Microsoft originally had poo-pooed for so long on Linux, And then we've seen, a full 180-degree shift on it. But let's look under the covers and look at why. Why does Microsoft love Linux now? Well, because it's largely driving Azure, right? Azure's become one of their major cash cows. Amazon contributes a lot to Linux, right? Well, look at AWS, right? Open source has become less about community and more about control. And remember, we've got plenty of other videos out there so you can train yourself so you don't have to be controlled by anybody. So we can help train you here. Now, the fact that we're seeing companies pivoting away from open source licenses is telling. They're opting for hybrid licenses that protect their business while offering some level of openness. So it's a compromise, but it's not what open source was meant to be, nor what it was when it really originally set out in the original GNU days, right? This shift dilutes the open source ethos. Developers no longer feel the same sense of freedom and creativity that once came with contributing to a project. It's as if the magic is gone. Now, let's also talk about security issues. Open source was once praised for its transparency. Anyone could audit the code and fix bugs. But today, open source projects are often underfunded and understaffed. The heartbleed vulnerability in OpenSSL showed us how dangerous it is to assume open source projects are automatically secure. With fewer eyes on the code, vulnerabilities slip through the cracks, and this leads to massive security breaches. So the trust in open source has been shaken. Another, and it wasn't just by Heartbleed. There's been a lot of other open source problems that we've seen recently. Another challenge facing open source is the rise of software as a service. Why download and maintain an open source tool when you can just subscribe to a managed service? The convenience of SaaS is killing open source adoption. Most users don't care if the tool is open source as long as it works and someone else is maintaining it. And I think that's it. I think a lot of people aren't wanting to pay to maintain it. They would rather pay a monthly license than to pay somebody that they have to maintain the project. So this trend towards SaaS has changed the game, leaving open source behind as a more relic than a solution for today's needs. I know even myself, I know that if I take an open source project, that means I've got to support it. And that means I've got to hire a developer to support it, right? Or else I'm going to have to spend my time supporting it. And in a lot of cases, it's ultimately a lot cheaper to actually just use something off the shelf and pay somebody a monthly fee. So definitely we're seeing a trend towards SaaS. The death of open source means that fewer opportunities for junior developers to cut their teeth on real-world projects. In the past, contributing to open source was a way to build portfolio and gain experience. But with corporate dominance and fewer active open source projects, these opportunities are drying up. It's a huge loss for the next generation of developers who won't have the same chance to dive into meaningful code contributions. And so like in my case, I originally started working on the Mono project, which was one of the first opportunities to build .NET for Linux. So I actually contributed to the project. I worked with it a ton, and as I went back and just recently, Mono was sold off to the Wine project, right? Because it originally, now we've moved. Microsoft has now open sourced all of .NET for .NET Core, and so that kind of killed off the old Mono project. So it's another example we see where corporate, has taken over an open source project. So, but hey, maybe this isn't the end. Maybe it's just a turning point. Open source might need to evolve to survive in today's landscape. We could see more companies adopting a hybrid model, offering part of their code as open source while keeping core features proprietary. It's not ideal, but it's better than just letting the open source community die out entirely. The community may need to rethink how we approach sustainability, financial support, and corporate involvement if open source is going to thrive again. Now, I love getting your guys' thoughts on this. Thanks for the comments out there, Lab Monkey. I agree. Amazon is a huge parasite doing this. Absolutely huge parasite. Somebody says open source was stupid from the beginning. I'm curious to hear why you think it's stupid. Is it unsustainable? Maybe instead of a better word, instead of stupid. I think that's a really good argument. You might say that it never really was going to be sustainable and that this is where software has evolved. So thanks for those comments out there. Honestly, best compliment I can get, and the metric I watch the most when I'm looking at these is how many comments I get. So I'm really excited to get those comments. So thanks, Lab Monkey. And I don't know how you say it. It's Hexen? Maybe that's how you say it. So appreciate those comments. Huge shout out to you guys. Thanks. But I think we need to figure out how we're going to make this sustainable, right? I think we've got to figure out how to make open source sustainable. Otherwise, I don't really know how open source is going to continue to run. So giving random people code for no reason is stupid. You could have just complete with the company. So it's true, and it's really tricky. Also made more money when you would still have people working on your project. It's an interesting point. I guess the old premise, so I appreciate this. I'm going to say it's Hexen, Hexen. I appreciate the comments here. The tricky part is the old methodology and thought process around open source was, hey, let's throw it out to the community. They're going to make it better, right? This went around with like security. If I throw it out there, hey, maybe people are going to work on this and they'll collaborate. And there was this sense of community, right? And it was this opportunity to be able to grow, to be able to improve your source, and to make your product better. That's kind of the old, core Linux methodology, right? And this has worked for Linux. So we got to kind of give a little shout out to where this is still working. The Linux kernel is still open source and is still driving. Now, like LabMonkey said, there's a lot of parasites that jump in there, right? There are a lot of these guys who show up to the potluck empty-handed, right? So giving random people for no code, it's tough. Like, yes, Mono was obsolete. So thanks, LabMonkey. Mono was obsoleted by .NET Core. No, you are missing the point. This is actually, Mono project is actually a perfect example of what we're talking about here. Wow, AB Media, thanks for jumping in. So there's a reason why we pay for software. It sometimes runs better than open source projects. I think it's more than sometimes. Open source can be great. I've used a lot of open source projects throughout the time, but I've also looked at open source projects, read through it, and been like, that's interesting. And I haven't contributed back to them because I found that they did it bad, right? And I didn't even want to start with their base. So tons of great comments. Really appreciate these comments, guys. Unfortunately, I have to run in about 10 minutes because I got to go get a root canal, which is not fun. But anyways, so the future of open source could hinge on finding new models for collaboration and compensation. And I love the collaboration in the comments, guys. Really appreciate this. Maybe we'll see more tools like GitHub sponsors or Open Collective that'll allow developers to fund their work while keeping their code open. And I think it's an interesting idea. It's possible the spirit of open source could live on, but it won't look the same as it did in the heydays. But I think that's probably for the better, as even the comments here are telling us, right? So, and speaking of collaboration, don't forget to go check out our old code samples. We have literally over 500 free code samples out there. So, while open source is fading and the reasons are clear, corporate dominance, financial instability, and the rise of SaaS, the once thriving community-driven movement is now at the mercy of companies that prioritize profit over collaboration. While there's still efforts to keep open source alive, the cracks are showing. We're seeing fewer contributions, more burnout, and a general shift toward proprietary solutions. Man, I really appreciate the comments, guys. I'm going to actually take these comments, and I'm going to make another video on this because obviously this is something that's of interest to folks. So I'm going to jump into another video on this one, and I'm going to grab these comments here and make sure that I take these. Really appreciate you guys collaborating with me today on this. It's my favorite thing. So love having these great discussions. Here at Starter Pack, we love to train software developers, and we build building software developers in our coding boot camp. So let us know if you need any help with custom software solutions in your business, and reach out because we'd love to help. You can go check out starterpack.com for our coding boot camps or starterpack.com/Spencer for our consulting. And again, thanks guys for all the comments today, and we will catch you guys tomorrow. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel because we bring you lots of great tutorials and tips that every developer should know. See you next time.